oh, you're looking into this and that. Well, we have a perfect solution for that.
Not interested. Don't call or don't talk to me anymore.
It ended up becoming a double-digit $1 million deal. I think we can offer a 20% discount on anyone who signs up from here. If you're listening this far, then you've earned it.
Following your career path on LinkedIn, it seems like you've been in sales for ages now. When was your first sales? When did you first took the sales job?
My first job was at 17, I think, 16 or 17. I started to work in a telesales company. So the first job I did, which was for about 6 months, was B2C, calling people during dinner if they wanted to buy underwear. No joke. That is actually what I was doing. So I would be calling saying like, hello, I'm looking for the man in the household and I have an offer, right? And then, you'd get all kinds of responses. It was not a very thankful, it was not a very appreciated job.
Right.
So I did that for 6 months, and then I moved on to B2B. So where I was selling financial services in a similar kind of setup, but very different kind of response from people, right? Much more professional, and could get much more into detail. And the product was also more complex, which I liked. And that's really where I spent then 2.5 years. And it's a tough environment, right? If you don't perform for 2-3 months, you're out. So being there for 2.5 years has been, it's pretty much taught me all the fundamentals of what I know today.
So selling financial services, what were the first things that you learned on the job, and what was the difference between like communicating your value proposition or selling to B2C and then going and transitioning to B2B? What was the first, and again, if you have that on top of your mind, what was the first sort of like remember thing for you selling to a different type of individuals or different type of sales?
So the first thing was in B2B, less swearing from the other side of the phone. So that was good. But in terms of like process and how to get into content or an approach, I think it was a lot more about like owning an account, right? So they would be, I would have my own list of accounts, and I would work my way through. And even if someone said no, they would still be mine. So I could develop the account, right? So I could get back later. I could like develop the relationship. I could maybe know that now is not the right time, but maybe in 3 or 6 months might be better. And then I could work with that, right? Because I think a lot in sales is about finding the right timing, speaking with someone at the right moment, and that allowed me to do that. Whereas in the job before that just wasn't.
This is a great point. This is a very great point, Vincent. So sometimes when a person tells you I'm not interested, it doesn't mean that they're not interested in your product. It just means that they are not interested in your product right now at this point of time, right? And developing that account and building the relationship is important in B2B, because you never know, maybe in a half a year or a year, you're going to sell another product, or you're still going to sell the same product, but you're probably going to engage with that with that individual. And this is a huge difference.
Actually, sorry. I just wanted to respond to that. No, I think that I would say it's one of the most important things today. So everybody is sending out automated email campaigns. Many are picking up the phone and calling, but understanding if you are calling at the right time, if your potential customer actually has a reason to speak with you right now, is essential. And some of that information you can actually find beforehand, right? You can know if certain things happened. Did they recently raise funding, or they're currently looking for this or that role? And other stuff you only learn when you're on the phone. Yeah, we just signed a contract with this supplier. We're stuck with them for the next year. Okay, well, there's only one way to find out, right? But like, I think a lot of the sales game in the end is about aligning yourself towards that moment on a large number of accounts.
A lot of from what you were just saying right now is called sort of like intent data, right? Sort of like to understanding where the client is in that buying process. And I know there are different types of getting the data. So we call intent data any sales signals that are out there. And I 100% agree with you there. So if you are selling a software development as a service, right? You have an IT company and you do the soft dev, right? And obviously, if you look, not just send the generic pray and spray email, but if you check the Glassdoor page and you see like, hey, who they are hiring right now, if they're hiring some front-end engineer and you know this, then you can personalize, right? You can, put the value in front of a prospect and say, hey, I saw you guys are hiring front-end engineers, and for example, I know that for one open position or for one available candidate in New York City, there are like 15 positions. So you're probably going to be spending a lot of time closing them in New York. So are you guys thinking about outsourcing, right? Obviously, this approach could be much more relevant because having that one actionable sales insight would lead you to tailoring your pitch and getting a whole different approach rather than just sending, hey, I'm Michael, I'm with this agency, we do software development, are you interested in talking to us, right? So it's a completely different approach. However, and there are some things I know, like, for example, my team, we've been using a lot of those insights and real-time data that we can pick from multiple sources or from the prospect website, or just look at the LinkedIn analytics when you have that premium where you can see their trend. Is the prospect laying off people, right? Or they are hiring, or where they are, or did they just change their someone from their C-suite or whatever, right? However, I talked to those guys from ZoomInfo. Do you know the company?
Yes.
I think everyone knows them these days, right? So they're a huge data provider, and they sell this, and I'm not sure. I mean, I've never had any sort of like feedback that I'm saying something that I shouldn't be saying, but I didn't sign any NDA, so whatever. So I was on the call with their sales rep, and they were selling intent data, and their platform is focus on that intent data, because you can imagine that it's not surprise selling or buying leads these days, right? A lot of providers, a lot of companies selling prospects or leads, and obviously everyone has their own story, everyone have different sources, their different quality of the data, but at the end of the day, aggregating data is not something new for sales teams in B2B in 2020. But what I was very interested in learning about from ZoomInfo was about that intent data piece, because I'm very skeptical about intent data. It's more like, how would you know that I'm looking for something or I want to buy something without actually picking my brains on it? If I didn't tell you that, hey, Vincent, I'm looking for a marketing agency or another or engagement platform for my SDRs, you cannot. ZoomInfo wouldn't be able to know this information, right? So how would they know and how accurate the intent data is? And I was very skeptical because for me personally, intent data is super inaccurate. And when I talked to their sales guy, he mentioned one interesting thing that I wanted to share with you and the listeners, how this thing works. Basically, ZoomInfo partners up with a lot of IP and internet providers in the United States. So if you have an office internet and you're using AT&T, for example, then they have partnership with ZoomInfo, and they're giving the sort of like, because again, for those who don't know, if you're using Wi-Fi or you're in internet, then anytime you send a request to get some information off the internet, you would leave some digital footprints. So we can get access, or the person that is managing that internet account can get access to what is your browsing history, right? Or what you were looking for. So basically ZoomInfo has partnership with like hundreds of those huge IP and internet providers in the United States. And they are supplying or feeding away the data about the different habits and different browsing histories and what people are looking for using that internet. And that would give sort of a good understanding of, and you can connect it to the company using certain internet provider, and then you can tell you where they are. And again, I was like, really, is that how it works? And is it like legitimate or something? It's a huge competitive advantage, right? Like no one else would have that sort of like access to data. But basically I was like, okay, show me. And I was on the call. We went to ZoomInfo. I remember one of my sales reps just that morning asked me, Michael, this is the client, they want to sign up with us. And I remember the client name. So I kind of say, okay, can you put this client name? And they put that name, and I can see that client was looking for lead generation at that time. So that was the real thing. And I was like, my mind was just blown away from that data. Yeah. So did you know that this sort of like some kind of that process exists out there? Because that was something
yes, there's a few providers in the space. I'm not sure if ZoomInfo gets their own data or if they've partnered with someone else for that, which is also quite common. But I've heard mixed stories about this. I've spoken with companies where this works well. I've spoken with companies where they actually saw a negative correlation between what a provider was saying based on this kind of data that you described and the actual results where they were closing deals. So I think in the end it comes down to just trying out a few things, and what works is different per company. For one company, it might be good to know, like, oh, did they raise funding? So the news might actually be one of the most important sources. For others, they just need to know if they are opening a new office or if they are reached a certain threshold of number of visitors on their website. And each of these might make you go to another provider. And one thing that I think, one thing that always seems to be worthwhile is like just to see, and this might not be intent, but it's about personalization. Just see what you can find on the person, right? In the end, we are all selling to people, and see if you can find some shared interest, or at least understand their interests. See if they were on a podcast recently, or were they interviewed, or things like that, which might seem in some cases to be quite time consuming, right? Listening to a podcast. But actually, usually that's what's going to get you the response. That's one that, your chances of getting an engaged conversation, like, they increase by multiples, right? So
I agree with you
in general, yeah. So it really, it depends what you're selling and to whom, to see which source makes sense. But in general, I don't believe there's a silver bullet. There's not just like, oh, if you connect this data provider, then it'll work, right?
Yeah.
That's
so intent data is 100% overpriced, and it's not that. So getting that level of personalization and just personal touch and kind of being more account based is more efficient at scale than just spending a lot and buying that intent data. And then at the end of the day, it's I always say that in sales, it's a lot about the art, communication, but it's also about the numbers. So even if you're a great sales guy and you have on your invest a lot of content and you buy those 100% quality leads, you will lose in case you are not making calls or sending emails or getting those touches from those follow-ups. So execution, right, at scale, and how many emails you send, how many prospects you talk to, how many relationships you build, and getting that conversion in place and getting that in a very systematic manner is far more efficient than just spending time discussing and building and so on and so forth, and then not executing, right? So that's 100%.
To actually like on that note, like on metrics, I think there's like at least some experience we had at FunnelFox that's worth sharing. I think it was almost 2 years ago, where we were really working on like figuring out our sales approach, right? We had a new product at the time, and we really were, we started with all the basics, like, okay, let's first get volume to a certain level, let's start measuring conversion on that volume, and so on, right? And what we found was actually that there was kind of like a breaking point where if we would push volume beyond that, the reps would still make the volume, but the conversion just like fell down entirely, right? So it was, if we were doing 50, if we said, okay, 50 calls a day, but prepared, like make sure you have your relevance, make sure you figured out what you're going to say, what do you know about this person, how are you going to connect with them, right? 50 worked. 70 didn't. At 70, like conversion dropped like significantly. And it took us like one or 2 weeks to figure out, like, okay, what did we change? Oh, we just increased the number. Okay, well, in that case, apparently this is too much, right? And this might differ per rep, right? So it's really important to keep an eye on what the numbers do, and also to let reps kind of do it the way they feel comfortable, because I was getting the feedback as well, like, okay, I don't have the time to do what I need to do. And if a rep feels like that, then they're feeling like they're going into a conversation unprepared, which is never good, right? So I think that's always good to, like, just volume, I think, is not a good thing. And I think, if anything, companies should be thinking the other direction. Like, what if we reduce the volume but increase the quality? I think nowadays, the state of the market where we are, I think on emails as well as calls, I think I think that's a healthy thing to do.
How did you what was your thinking process where you were looking for that silver line in terms of how many calls a rep should make or how many emails a rep should send? Because again, for me, I was like, it's very individual. It's sort of like, hey, I have reps that have 100 emails and they're efficient, and I have reps that send 40 emails and they're inefficient. So is there any approach that people can follow to get to the sweet spot?
Mm-hmm. So what matters is deals, right? In the end. So if you can send 10 emails, you close 10 deals, then you send 10 emails, right? I don't mind. However, if you don't close 10 deals and that's the target, then I'm going to ask why you didn't send the required X emails that we agreed on, right? So I think it's kind of like a fallback metric in a way. So if performance is there, then okay, then whatever they're doing seems to work. We try to understand it. We see what we can replicate, but I'm not going to push them around to make them conform with the method, right? But if we're not seeing results, then we need to make sure we at least have enough volume that we can say something about it. Because if someone is doing 10 calls a day, then I just don't have enough data, right? Like that's going to be 1 or 2 conversations maybe if we're lucky. So that's just not going to cut it, right?
That's a great example. That's an amazing example. I always tell my sales reps is if you're failing your tasks, sort of like past the due date, I am okay as long as you're closing your quotas, right? But if you're not closing the quotas and you're failing your tasks, then the question is maybe because you failed the tasks, you didn't meet the quota, right? So it's sort of like a 1-2 punch, right? So, but if you are, meeting the quota and then you're deviating from an average because you're sending less emails or you're focusing on your key accounts more and thinking about them and preparing about them, and that works for you, and that's how it was through. That's great. But having that sort of like benchmark in place and just comparing different, sort of like different approaches also just work fine. So going back to where we started about generating interest and talking to a prospect and your experience in B2B. So whenever I do a campaign or whenever I start outreach and on the call or email or talking to people on LinkedIn, obviously the majority of the responses that folks get is, I'm not interested, sorry, right? I know that for me personally, there are 2 types of not interested. Those that I can follow up on. If someone is say, hey, Michael, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. Thank you, John. And those that say not interested or opt out or, like don't call me or don't talk to me anymore, right? So these are obvious, right? However, there are others that people think that they are not interested. However, at the end of the day, these are more interested prospects. And what I mean by that is are the following. I mentioned this a few minutes ago about send me more information and I'm not the right person. So what we realized is very often reps, if someone would say, hey, send me more information, or I will look at what you can send to me, a lot of reps would consider this as the positive or in progress response, like that they engaged and someone will look in that information. However, usually it's the opposite, and people would just kind of tell you this to get off the call. So what do you think from your own experience and perspective? Is that a good thing? Send me more information. Obviously, it's a good, but in terms of, it falls down to the positive category or the negative category of responses?
So in the first job I ever had at the telesales, they would say don't avoid at all costs, right? That was the strategy there. That was a call center, right? Full on. Nowadays, I would say it depends, and I think there's so much I can answer to this. So I'll try to take them one by one. The first thing that I would want to put attention to is that before it ever gets to this point, a lot has happened already. A lot can happen in 10, 20 seconds, actually, which is the first part of the call, right? And I've noticed that whenever we were discussing call recordings and going through things, that we iterated for months on the first 10 to 20 seconds of the call. And by changing and adapting how we presented ourselves, what box we were being put in by the other side, because they're always trying to put you in a box, like, oh, you're like this, we have that already, right? Or you're like that. And so picking word by word, picking the right things, getting an early first commitment of yes, they'd like to hear more about this. This all happens in 20 seconds, right? if you do that right, and if you get really good at it, many of these objections don't even happen, right? And I think it's important to understand that you could solve the problem instead of like fighting the symptom that happens at the end of it, right? I'll get to what you can say nonetheless, because it will still happen, of course. But I think this is really heavily overlooked when looking at these kind of objections. If you run into them all the time, then actually the road to it will actually probably can be improved, right? So that's the first thing I'll say about it. The second is that specifically the one that you're mentioning, right? Like send me some information. The question is in what context, right? Like, did you already get into detail about what you do as a company, what benefit you can, what benefit you can provide them with? And are they saying, this sounds interesting, please send me some information? Fair, right? I'm not gonna object that. I try to usually keep conversations as natural as possible, right? But if it's pretty early on, hey, I don't have time, can you send me something by email? Then either I try to get them to specify, like, okay, what would you like to know more about? And that'll usually make clear that actually they have no clue what this is about yet, right? So
Right.
Then I try to work around it. I try to say, you know what, I'll just call you back at a better time. Maybe we can get something in the calendar. How about? And try to get them on the phone again, because that is usually more effective. But that's kind of like for that specific question. I think it's a tricky one, because let's put it this way: if it's genuine, if it feels genuine, and it feels like they're going to read it, then I would send it. If it feels like a brush off, then I would avoid sending something unless I find no other way.
Yeah, that's totally fair. That's totally fair. Another type of those is I'm not the right person, right? Like there are actually two of those. I'm not the right person and not the right time. So starting with a not the right person, are there any tricks that you would recommend, or anything that your thoughts on how people can find the right person, right? If I'm reached out to me, I say I'm not the right person, but I don't give you the name of the right person, right?
Mm-hmm.
How should I go about it?
So in general, and it depends on the mood in the call, right? If someone, like, again, are they brushing you off? I'm not the right person. Like they want to hang up as soon as possible, or is someone just saying, oh yeah, I understand what this is about, but I don't think this is something that's on my responsibility.
Right.
So in the latter, then if possible, let's put it that way, I would try to win as much information as possible, right? So if there's a conversation going, in the end, most of what you're doing is not pitching, it's learning, right? It's trying to figure out what are the exact circumstances at this account, the timing, the people involved, the current solutions, everything. There's so much information that you're trying to take in, right? And if someone that's not even going to make the decision can provide you half of that, amazing, right? Because you don't have to burn any of the conversation time you would have with the other person. You can come better prepared. So I wouldn't push them for a name. Usually I would ask them once. If they say no, then I would ask them something else, right? But I would try to win as much information as possible without making them lose their temper, so to say. But in the end, this person is not going to be involved in the decision-making process. So the more information I can get on how things work in the organization, even if it's not a name of someone or an email or the address or a phone number, that can still be incredibly valuable when I get to my next conversation.
We talked already about sort of like foundation, and every time we talk about this, we say, hey, you need to be personal. Hey, you need to spend time doing this, researching, so on and so forth. So obviously everything goes down to when one would call the like account-based sales or account-based marketing, right? Where it's relationship-based, where it's about the company, about the person, not generally about the crowd or about the list of people, right? So as far as I know, anything about like ABM in general, and just doing a more targeted work, it's very time consuming, right? And it requires a lot of manual work because you need to add, you need to check out, you need to book, you need to put a task, you need to follow up, you need to research. So it takes minutes to work on a certain account, and then going to different individuals, and then building campaigns or building messaging for a certain company, and so on and so forth. So how reps can be efficient. So obviously their tool set or what tech they're using for some of their work to automate some of their work. Then maybe their, I don't know, time management, their prioritization. So because you are in this space and you know a lot about the concept and so on and so forth. So what, for those people that wanted to pursue their sales and marketing with from the standpoint of being more account based, what is your general sort of like plan or go-to market strategy in that regard?
So I think you can do this, the simplest form of account-based sales is just saying, okay, I have an account and I'm going to focus specifically on that. But you can take it as far as having separate campaigns, right, for like executive levels and for 3 different roles in the organization. You might be reaching out to them at 3 different moments in time, which are like tacked towards each other. And that's how far you can take it as well. And then you call it exactly the right time, and they will all have heard about you already. That is very complex. Right. I would not suggest to start there. So I would suggest to start thinking of your potential customers as accounts. That's like a first start, right? And then it's something we worked on a lot at FunnelFox, of course. So there's no way not mentioning the work that we've done there as an answer here. We realize that there's a lot of different data sources that people are looking, right? Mm-hmm. So they're going from tab to tab in their browser and trying to figure out, what is the piece of information that they can use here. So in terms of tools, what you mentioned, I mean, that we're providing one possible way of handling that, but it depends if it works for you, right? Again, what's more important is to know what piece of information you are looking for, and I think understanding that trigger or that thing that makes your pitch or your conversation work well, that will define it for you. And some of the companies that we work with, they have account-based systems that developed their own logic. They have actual like servers running with like they're pulling in data from all places on the web, and that's kind of scores their accounts, and that's how they then decide which ones to go after. But I think the one thing to avoid, and that might be a more actionable thing to do, is don't read, like you're looking for something relevant to say and you can't find it, don't just reach out, right? Like don't say, okay, I can't find anything. Well, here goes my default template, right? It's like, no, just go to the next one. You usually have a list, right? Pick the next one, see if you can find it there. You can time box, saying like, okay, I do not spend more than 10 minutes or 15 minutes on one account. If I haven't found anything by then, I park them, right? I just see until something does happen. Maybe now is not the right time, else I would have maybe found something, right? And that's already becoming a pretty personalized approach, because that means that you're then saying, okay, I'm gonna wait for the right moment for the right piece of information, and basically you're using relevance on your accounts, right? So I think that's the simplest way of looking at it. Then there are, of course, understanding the organization you're selling into is the other part, right? So the one part is what can you say, what can you relate to, but the part what you mentioned before, like, hey, what should I be talking with your colleague John in marketing, right? Knowing this before you start is important. So you can use, of course, things like LinkedIn, where you can have looked up already who are the roles that you would usually be able to sell to, and have those names ready, or also understand if they even have them. Not all companies have all roles, and they certainly don't always work the same way and are not defined in the same way. Or use another tool that shows you this information in your inbox, for example. And that's in account-based sales. I think those are the two most important things. So be relevant to this specific account and understand the organizational structure that you're selling into.
So basically, that's the same process that's more like in like a like a traditional approach that everyone is doing, but conceptually, you're not selling to an individual, you're selling to account, right? And you look at the company from the organization standpoint, that you're going between different individuals, building relationship with different people, identifying who is the right person, where your product or service fit into their structure and different decision-making process, and building relationship with key people, and just kind of learning more and understanding the value that your product or service can bring to a whole organization, not just to the certain person or by fixing the problem, right? Cool. So
I think just to add to that,
uh-huh.
I do think there isn't such a big difference between traditional sales and account-based sales.
Mm-hmm.
It's nuances in the end.
Yeah.
You are still selling to people, but you're just considering the network of people. It's basically acknowledging the fact that usually in B2B you're not selling to one person.
Right.
There's always more people involved.
Yeah.
And understanding that and even working with it. And if you combine it, of course, with account-based marketing, then you can do, as mentioned, pretty advanced things that are actually, once you have them up and running, they're not that much work anymore to do a pretty sophisticated sales strategy to a company.
Yeah, and account-based can not just be in the sales process, but also in how you manage your client accounts, right? Because the worst thing is that when you're a vendor and you work with someone and you build the whole campaign, the relationship, and you work with them, but at the end of the day, the person that you work from that organization is not an actual decision maker, and you never put in the loop the actual decision maker. So when the time comes, so there are some problems, the CEO from that end would say, we need to end this relationship. And then the account manager on our end wouldn't be able to argue that, because he never talked to a decision maker. He never reported to the decision maker. He doesn't know what that person is or wants or what the challenges are. He just worked on that small project, and so that's the worst. So that's why I always say to my team, whenever even if you have a champion in the team, or whenever you have a team that you work with from the client end, still try to understand the whole structure, trying to understand what are the overall company challenges and who is the end person that would be looking for the results that your campaign or your effort would bring to them, right? And if you didn't build any relationship with that person, then you're probably going to lose that account if something going to be shaking there, right?
It's not just that even, and I totally agree, definitely. But it goes even further, right? So one of the issues we had initially at FunnelFox, when we used to sell to sales operations who would then introduce us to the rest of the team, right? So it would be a top-down sales approach. And we had a few times, we started to see a trend that if that person would leave the company, we were at a very high risk to lose that contract, that account, right? Because like our initial product was pretty invisible. It just ran in the background. So as soon as that person was gone, nobody knew it was running anymore. And then someone else came along and said, why are we paying for this? What does it even do? Yeah. And there you go, gone was the contract, right? And or there was a renewal and the card was, of course, declined because that person wasn't there anymore. Yeah. And we had to basically resell into the company, which sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. So I think also from that perspective, where nowadays, actually most of the revenue is made after the first transaction in most businesses. Yeah. It's so important to have more than one point of contact and to have awareness in the organization, right? To make sure more than one person knows why you are there and what value you're providing.
Talking about FunnelFox, and what are the kind of top 3 things that you guys help in the ABM to serve, like to automate, or to what kind of challenges, top 3 challenges that the platform helps sellers or marketers to solve within the ABM concept, or within the sort of like the B2B sales concept?
Yeah. 3 is a good number because we've built it around 3 pillars. So
nice. I didn't know that. So
perfect. So the first one we do is what we call sales triggers. So that's where we're talking about relevance before, right? So we provide news articles, job ads, so open job positions, as well as technologies that are used by an account. And we do this in a fully automated way as everything else. So imagine you have your list of target accounts, or you're talking even with someone in your inbox. Our system will detect like, oh, this is that account, and on the side we will actually show, oh, this account, like yesterday they hired somebody new in this role, right? So you can mention that in your conversation, and you can do that in your inbox when you're already in contact, or you can do it on the FunnelFox platform when you're exploring new accounts and trying to figure out who to reach out to. So again, relevance is important. So you can set your filters up front. You can say, I only want to know if they acquired someone. I only want to know if they got an investment. I only want to know if they're hiring for marketing roles, for example. All those things that you can set, you set it once, and then from there on, whenever you do something, that's what you'll automatically get suggested. So that's the first pillar, sales triggers. The second one is prospects, and prospects is two-sided. On the one hand, it's to easily understand who else is at this account, right? So again, based on who you're communicating with, or which account you're looking at, it will automatically show, based on your filters, any people that match. So if you say, I only want to know marketing directors and above and sales directors and above, because it's always one of the two, then those are the only people that will be shown there. And you can just explore which roles they have. And if you want their contact details, you can also get them right then and there. So phone numbers, email addresses. But if not, then that's fine too. And you can just use the information in a way that we just discussed, right? Where you're using people's names and roles. So that's the prospecting part. And then the third part is the activities per account. So to have 100% visibility, what if someone else within the company has been speaking with them? I would want to know, right? So that's, again, automatically capturing all that information, emails, meetings, and knowing what happened. This is something you would have in many CRMs, but you'd be surprised how many of them still require manual work for that. Yeah. The idea of FunnelFox is that when you set it up, if you'd create an account right now and you wouldn't have put anything in, and you just add a domain of an account you're interested in, all this information would show automatically. You wouldn't have to do anything for that. And the idea is to bring together a lot of the things that people are currently manually looking up everywhere, and just allow you to focus on the conversation with the person at the account you're talking with.
This is a great way. These three pillars are, the very important parts of the sales process for the personal performance, right? Because that's exactly what we've been just discussing over that 30 or 50, 45 minutes, right? That understanding who's the right person and understanding different people and their roles and the structure, personalizing your outreach, making sure that you're relevant, right? That you can speak to them with regards to creating the value, or just bringing the information that is has the right timing, right? And how you can make sure that you're efficient, and then you're not just spending your time and wasting it, just going through a lot of those data and doing a lot of manual work. So this is really great. How does this the FunnelFox fit in the sales team tech stack? What I mean by the tech stack is, obviously I have my CRM system like Salesforce or HubSpot, or should I have that CRM system, or the FunnelFox itself is the CRM system, so I don't need to have one? But because what you were saying, I don't see all the features that would generally the sales, for example, like pipelines and everything that goes with the pipelines and the forms and so on and so forth. That's the first part. And then, for example, the sales enablement the sales engagement platforms like Outreach or Reply or something for the automation. So is this, what is the concept for the FunnelFox? Is this just the standalone product that you can use to be more efficient, or that should be, as FunnelFox should be a part of the whole chain or sequence of different tools, and they all should be talking between each other, or they are self-supplement?
That's a very good question, and I think it's important for many who are listening to understand that, right? Because we're using all like 10 tools or more on average. So what is this? What does it replace? Where does it fit in, right? We've built FunnelFox in a way that you can use it with any CRM or without. So it's up to you. If you're in the very early days and you have no process yet, no CRM, then FunnelFox is great because you don't have to do anything for it to keep track of everything that's happening. If you're already much more progressed, which many of our customers are, you have like 50 people on a sales team, you have SDRs, AEs, customer success, then you can also use it, but usually you'll be using Salesforce or something like that to be your CRM, right? We see ourselves being used at the moment more by account executives and customer success, because SDRs are more in those tools that you mentioned. They'll be more in the outreach, the Salesloft of the world. And we are looking at integrating there. So to provide our solution, our data there, because it's very relevant at the moment of prospecting as well. But the version that we have out there right now is more for like, if you're still working from your inbox, it's great because it just provides that information right there. Yeah, if you're using a CRM, be it Pipedrive, HubSpot, or Salesforce, but you're looking actually for external data that's going to help you have better conversations, that's going to give you more leads, then yeah, we offer a really nicely integrated set of features that just works, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. And that's kind of the idea. In the long run, we will add things like a pipeline, but not in the way that you know it, right? So the whole idea of FunnelFox is that you do not have to enter data ever. Like, there's no option to enter data. Like, it doesn't exist.
That's nice.
And we will avoid creating it at all costs, right? But so instead of having your pipeline with the different stages, what we are more working on right now is like engagement score and like how hot is a certain account, right? How much is happening, and maybe based on certain content that's being sent, we might be able to say also something about how far they are in the pipeline. But again, we want to hold on to this idea that it has to be autonomous in the end, and that's why instead of putting a manual pipeline in there, we prefer to not have it for now, and maybe you choose to have a CRM next to it. But when we do have something that can actually do that part of the job, it will be something like you've never seen before.
Perfect, Vincent. This is really great. Congrats on the success that you guys have so far. I know that we have just a few more minutes here, so wanted to wrap this up with the following question. Because we've been discussing the communication patterns and generally how you go about communicating and conversing your value proposition and working with different responses, and I believe you running the company, you've been you are sold to a lot. I mean, people are selling you a lot. You receive a lot of emails, and you have a lot of experience in selling to other people. So what are the top three, not the mistakes, but maybe top three recommendations that you would share with the listeners that are currently either pursuing the sales and marketing career or building the teams, with regards to either mistake that they shouldn't be making or anything that you've noticed that they can utilize on their day-to-day?
The first one that comes to mind right away is what people tend to do, especially people that are just getting into sales. It's a very, you're on the spot, and even in the beginning, someone might even be listening with you, right? So you're sitting there, you're having a call, and it's a very, it makes you very nervous. But the response that many people have to that is that as soon as they have the first sign of this customer might be a good fit, they start pitching right away. They're like, oh, I hear, oh, you're looking into this and that. Well, we have a perfect solution for that, because they've been product trained, right? So they throw out all their product knowledge, but actually they don't know the whole picture yet. So if like the first thing I would say is like, don't pitch, just don't do it. Avoid from pitching, avoid it, and just ask questions, understand more. Like, if you hang up at the end of the conversation and you haven't pitched, but you understand exactly what is going on there, then you've done a pretty good job. And probably that person will anyway answer you again if you would call or if you would send an email, right? So let go of that stop looking for that signal when you can start pushing your product knowledge out, because it always backfires. It always does, because it's super unnatural, right? Like, well,
Yeah.
how would you respond if you're having a conversation?
Yeah.
They seem to be interested in your problem. You start telling them, and then just like suddenly there's this wave of information that you didn't ask for that gets thrown over you, that often isn't even exactly relevant, because it's just like the first is the tip of the iceberg, right? So dig in, understand it, and you'll be able to make a much more appealing proposal after that. So that would definitely be my first one. Let me think. The other thing is priming the conversation the right way, and that comes back a bit to what I mentioned before. I think it's so important that in the first, especially in the first 10 to 20 seconds, but in general, like it comes down to the first 20 seconds when you're calling, right? Make sure you set the right stage for the conversation you want to have. And I think usually that's where many of the mistakes that happen because that part wasn't done right. And it makes sense even for companies, I think, to just like, I'm not a big fan of calling scripts, but that first part you can script it, and you can just say like, okay, we know this works, just say this, right? And then from there on, it can be a natural conversation. But those like first 10, 20 seconds, like just read it, like in a natural way, obviously. But that'll be the second one. And finally, just be normal, right? Be like in a similar way as where you said, read it out loud and see if it sounds like a normal email. I think it's the same with calling, right? Imagine you were having a conversation with someone and they would respond that way to you. How would you feel, right? And I think that's why also listening to calls is so important, right? Like that's by managers as well as the reps themselves. I always say reps should be listening to their own calls, and I ask them to come to me with what they found so far, and I will have done my own research and will have listened to the ones that I've selected where things went really well, or where we think that there could be something to improve. But that's when I speak with companies and I hear that they're not listening to that, like, wow, you're leaving so much money on the table.
I've one of my first jobs in sales that I took, I was like super hungry for the information. So I was going to the office like 1 hour earlier before everyone else starts their shift, or I was working for the customer support team. That was like, I don't know, 10 years ago. And I was listening to other reps calls, like all of them, and was like taking the notes of their best practices or how they thought it or what they did about, and so on and so forth. And that helped me a lot to progress and be the best in the game, just because I could collect all of those knowledge and all of those different calls and then try some of that on my end. And definitely listening to the calls that everyone is making or that you make yourself is also very important. And then also the third point about being to answer directly is super important, because what I notice a lot about the SDRs and BDRs and people in sales, that if you know the product, the script, or just that you had a product training, you always have an idea of how you would explain that product, but that explanation in any of the training materials would be so different from the way that the client would ask this certain question. So you would need to frame that question differently as well. And especially when you review some of those junior emails where the junior SDR sends an email, because if the client asks like 3 bullet point questions, and they usually go to the canned responses and they copy the text and they paste the text and they rephrase something, but when you start reading and when a person has experience, you see that was copied, that's not the exact. So the best recommendation is just answer straight away. And that's what your first point was, like, you don't pitch, right? In the actual sales call, you just ask question, you answer the questions, that's it, right? You never pitch. There's no like a minute where you're like talking 3 minutes straight. You can answer the question in a more elaborate way, or taking more time, but you never pitch, and you never just start explaining the whole platform without actually answering the question and being very to the point. So Vincent, that was really great. Listen, I really appreciate you taking the time and joining me for this discussion. This was really great. We're going to put Funnel Fox link to the description. So do you guys entertain any discounts or coupons for the people that can be listening to this, that they can, or you don't have that in your kind of sales practice these days?
I didn't come prepared for that question, but I think we can make something work. Sure. No, it was really fun to be here, and I it was nice to reflect on some of these thoughts and also to learn from some of your examples. So thanks for that. In terms of an offer, I think we can offer a 20% discount on anyone who signs up from here. I think they're gonna have to write us. So how about they let them write me directly, Vincent@funnelfox.com. If you're listening this far, then you've earned it. So
yeah.
Vincent@funnelfox.com, just write me that you want to have the discount, and I'll make it happen.
Perfect. Listen, I appreciate this, and I hope that listeners would enjoy our conversation, get some notes, and get on and get a trial with, or get sign up for the Funnel Fox and get the 20% discount. So I appreciate that, Vincent. And thank you guys for listening to this.